start with this week, I'm joined on the line by Gemma Fox, who's part of the People's Tribunal into Child Sexual Abuse. Gemma, tell us how you managed to get involved with all this. What is this People's Tribunal?
It's set up by volunteers. A lot of the volunteers are survivors of child abuse themselves. And basically, it was a meeting in London, and it all started from this meeting in London, and it's grown from strength to strength.
What does the People's Tribunal actually do that the official government inquiry can't do then?
Investigate, because they're investigating themselves, and I don't know how successful that's going to be, investigating themselves.
What's your own experience? What brought you to this subject?
I am also a survivor of homosexual abuse. My father was done for gross indecent assault on me when I was 7. He was charged with, like I say, gross indecent assault, which is now child rape, and he received 1 year's community service.
So what was the situation at home that allowed that to take place?
It was my mother that actually started the sick games with me. My father was an alcoholic, and basically it was led by my mother, the sexual abuse. And she was doing that with me and my father, and she was taking my brother to Cubs for a second husband to abuse while she watched through the hatch. Both of them Cub leaders in the Trafford district.
Well, this sounds pretty shocking, that something where children are entrusted to the Cubs, Bade and Powell and all that, somehow abused. What was the reaction, and how long did this go on for until it was dealt with?
It's actually been charged with 3 cautions for child sexual abuse. As soon as the Cub, federation, whatever you want to call it, found out, Tony was kicked out of the Cubs, and then as soon as they knew the inkling that my mother was also involved, as she'd gone round to one of his victims, she pretended to console him, and all she was doing is seeing what he'd said to the police, to relay to her now husband.
Okay, so what happened then?
I know that there was various complaints made to social services when he was moved into my house. I know that there was a lot of people from Scouting that had phoned social services and informed them that he'd been done for sexual assault, and then basically was left there.
Oh, that's amazing. Do you know of any other children who were abused at the Scouts?
Yes, I do. Like I say, my brother, and there was another victim of theirs, very brave man, who tried to actually help my brother when my brother was put into care because he knew too much.
And were there a sort of split then in the local scouting group, where some of the leaders covering up for this sexual abuse of the kids, and some trying to fight against it? No,
they were pretty much outed by the whole scouting community, thankfully.
And what about, meanwhile, with you at home? How were things going?
It was awful living at home. When he first moved in, I was quite young, and she's sticking her tongue out at me, and she's doing this, she's doing that, and I basically spent most of my childhood in hiding in my bedroom, so I couldn't get accused of anything.
And what about your friends, say, from school, for example? Could you talk to them at all?
Oh, no, I couldn't. I was very embarrassed. I didn't really want anyone finding out in case they thought I was like that too.
How did this affect you then as a youngster, other than, it's a pretty awful thing to feel like you're isolated in your own room. Couldn't you get out of the house maybe to play with friends and stay out of the way? I
used to work at a farm, actually, and I'd spend as much time there as possible, staying way later than my actual hours. I enjoyed horse riding, and I used to do that quite a lot just to get out of the way. But apart from that, I wasn't allowed to go out.
How do you feel around about that time the various abusers were actually being dealt with by police and by the other authorities?
I don't think they were. I was basically ignored. They was allowed to do basically to me whatever they wanted to do, and nobody at all seemed to want to help me.
Well, of course, they've got to know, haven't they, to begin with? And, you're obviously in a
He'd been
situation
charged.
where you don't... Sorry?
He'd been charged with sexual assault, so the police were very much aware of who he was, and even so much down to I know that they would have been aware of her going round to this victim's house and seeing what had been said about him.
Okay, and for you, how long did this span? How old were you, and how many years?
Well, from the ages, when I finally got to read my social services notes, it reads, fell down the stairs at 6 months. I mean, how a baby of 6 months can fall down the stairs when I wasn't crawling, I wasn't walking, So he read that, and then by the age of 7, my father's getting done for gross indecent assault.
When did this abuse start to you? How old were you, and when did it finish?
I feel as I can remember.
Really, so young?
Yeah.
And when did it finish, Gemma?
The sexual abuse finished when my brother went into care.
And then were you taken into care too, or what?
No, I wasn't taken. My mother put my brother into care because her husband, that she'd now moved in, the second husband, had been abusing him within the club system, and basically he was removed from the house because he knew too much, and he was going to tell us. But
you were still with your mum, who'd been kind of protecting him and covering up for him.
Yeah.
But that abuse actually stopped then, did it?
The sexual abuse did, but the mentally and emotional abuse carried on until I was 16, and my mother took me out.
So how did you survive after all that? I mean, you've had an upbringing which most people would be really frightened about, having that kind of upbringing up to the age of 16, and then suddenly you're out on the streets. What happened then?
I was actually staying with a friend. She'd just literally got a flat. She had no hot water, no heating. She had a double bed and a fridge, and I was on a roll-up mat on her living room floor for about 2 or 3 weeks until I was able to get myself into a hostel. I wasn't allowed to claim benefits because my mum wouldn't stop claiming child benefit for me, so the benefits place wouldn't pay me, and basically had to wait until she decided that she wasn't going to claim, or they investigated the claim, and then I was able to get into a 16 to 19 hostel.
How did you get on in the hostel? Was that your first little glimpse of freedom, or were there problems there too?
No, I was very lucky within the hostel that I was put in, and I can't thank the staff enough for the way that they were. They were very caring. There was a lady called Auntie Rose that used to work in there, and lo and behold, anybody hurt one of her children.
Have you managed to sort of pull your life together since then, Gemma?
Yes, I have. I had a stroke after my daughter. They left the placenta in, which left me partly sighted with mobility issues. And it was after the stroke that a lot of the flashbacks and post-traumatic stress was forefronted for myself, and so I kind of put it in a box up until then, and then with the stroke it kind of brought it all back for me, unfortunately. But I do cope well with it on a daily basis. I mean, I've got children, so they keep me busy and preoccupied.
And what about relationships? Because one of the things that's common amongst people who've been abused in childhood is that they find it difficult to keep relationships. How have you managed?
Yes, I do find it hard to trust. I'm quite bad at trusting people.
What about the authorities? Have they apologised in any way for...
I can't even get them to admit what's happened to me.
What, have you tried?
Yes, I have. I wrote many a letter. I've asked to see my paperwork. I was only allowed to see a small section of my paperwork after taking a police officer, which also was a friend, and she had to remind them of the Freedom of Information Act that was in whatever year it was. And then I was allowed to read a section of an annex from a conference that was held after my father had sexually abused me, something that my mother had told me. It was all in my head.
Do you have any contact with other, like, brothers and sisters, your family?
No. My brothers turned out very much like them, and my sister's not far from that neither.
So have you got any advice for people listening who maybe have had some sort of similar experience or know someone close to them who's had a similar sort of experience? Because, the trouble is, it sounds to me like you have gone, once you're old enough anyway, to the authorities to try and get something done about this, and you haven't had a very good time. So what advice have you got for them because this sort of thing is now being discussed much more openly than it was, even just a few years ago?
Yeah, I think if you was to go to your doctor and if you can form a good relationship with your doctor, I think that would be probably the best way forward. She could any counselling. Unfortunately, the counselling services are very busy at present, and it does take a long time for even that to kick in. But basically, your first step would be to go to the doctors and hopefully, strike up some sort of relationship. I'm quite lucky in that respect. I get on well with my doctor, and she is quite good. But I mean, if anyone was going through it now, I'd just plead for them to come forward, tell a teacher, tell anybody that's in that sort of role. Don't put yourself at risk. But if you was to tell a teacher or on the quiet, then they would be able to help you make steps of moving things forward for you.
What about justice, though? I mean, do you still hope for justice? Can you expect justice? Should you? Do you think?
I don't think. Not in this. Not at the minute, I'm afraid. I have been to the police on several occasions. My mother's never sat in a police cell. She's never been questioned. Nothing's happened to her at all. I went to the police in September 2012, 2013. 12, and I was meant to be in court the beginning of the 6 weeks holidays with my brother, but unfortunately he put a sick note in, and it's now been adjourned till March next year, which is going to make the grand total about 3 years of waiting for even a day in court.
It sounds to me like, there's a bit of a pattern here. Lots of people like yourself, Gemma, haven't been believed in the past. Perhaps they will be now. Well, why do you think society has developed like this, so that some of the most heinous crimes, actually, that it's possible to commit, when someone comes forward like yourself to say, this has happened to me, people don't seem to want to know?
It seems to be the police that they don't seem to be wanting to act on it, unfortunately. I mean, like I say, I went to the police then, and my concerns were my mother, her husband. Do you know what I mean? It was all of them that was involved. But as my brother's the easy target, they seem to go after him. I mean, my mum's husband is actually, he works for ambulance driver, basically, the fat controller.
And so that he's got some sort of official position there. I mean, effectively a kind of civil servant working for the ambulance service. And
so
do you think he was able to, put pressure on somehow to get the police to back off?
Yes, I do believe he has friends in the police service.
Also, how do you manage to sort of keep it together, Gemma? This is a pretty horrible thing to have in your past, and particularly bad because you haven't had justice.
I think it's my children that keep me going. I do try and focus on them. I mean, don't get me wrong, I have days where I don't want to get out of bed, and I have days where it's very hard, but I keep going because I've got my kids and I want more and I want better for them.
Okay, the People's Tribunal then, what's the state of play with that at the moment? Are you having meetings that are open to the public? What's happening, and when are you due to report?
We will be having a public forum in January where the public and the findings will all be made available to everybody. We're having meet and greets in Manchester, in Yates's, just outside Piccadilly Gardens, on the 29th of September at 5:30 to 7, and then another meet and greet in Wetherspoons in Rotherham on the 30th, and that's between 1 and 3.
And what can people expect at these sorts of events?
Basically, we want to give everybody the opportunity to have their say. As it is the People's Tribunal. It is primarily for the people, and we just want to give everybody the opportunity to feel that they've had their say, unlike the government one.
So, I mean, what's your thoughts about the way the Goddard Enquiry is going to proceed? I mean, I know they're at least predicting now that there won't be any report until 2020.
I don't understand what's needed to take so long. Unfortunately, I don't have much faith that they're going to investigate themselves, or at least any living members.
I noticed Leah McGrath-Goodman, American journalist, pointed out a few weeks ago that many of the staff for the Goddard Enquiry are actually coming from the Home Office, which is itself under investigation.
Exactly. So how are they going to investigate themselves if they're working from the same people?
Okay, well, Gemma Fox from Manchester, thanks ever so much for joining us today. And I'll just remind listeners of the website. It's www.ukcsapt, that's ukcsapt, that's UK Child Sex Abuse People's Tribunal.org.uk, and the phone number is 07549 228 377. 07549 228 377, and I'll repeat those details at the end of the show. But for the meantime, Gemma Fox, thanks very much for joining us on Dialect.
Okay, thank you.
You're listening to dialectradio.co.uk.